Welcome to the OpenHearted Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the OpenHearted Podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, joined with my main man, Photon John. Kev, what's going on, brother?
Just getting ready for another week. Starting to wind down for the year with work and stuff. So,
tell you what, man, it's good to have you back. You weren't at the last episode. Man. We had a bit of a shake up there.
Yeah.
All right.
Music and whatnot interfering. But
yeah, that's it, man. Busy life. Mm-hmm. You know, you got to. We've got to. When limit, you got limited time, right?
Yep. In the middle of the next album. So, but should be fine. Rest of the year.
Nice, good. I hear you went to Paul McCartney concert.
I did. That was bloody amazing.
How was it? What was your most favorite song?
Oh man! He just cracked out "Love Me Do," which is like from 1965 or something, which I wasn't expecting. And that's when I had that sort of surreal moment where I'm like, I'm watching a Beatle. This is insane.
crazy. Man, awesome stuff. I tell you what, I was actually speaking at a conference on last Friday up on the Gold Coast. So if I have anyone from that conference, thank you very much to Velg, who invited me up there to speak there about neurodiversity in the vet sector. And I can tell you right now, I was actually quite surprised. I had a full house, was packed room, man. We had some really cool stuff happen in regards to feedback and all that. So it looks like there's some cool stuff happening for us at Neurodiversity Academy. But talking about neurodiversity, I reckon we should bring our guest up. What do you reckon, Photon John?
I reckon so.
All right. For all of those who don't know, we've got a really good guest today. I've known this person for a fair while now, and since like a lot of the early days. So let's welcome to the stage Rachel Worsley from Neurodiversity Media. Rachel, what's going on, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, everything's good. How are you?
I'll tell you the truth. I'm just excited to have you. We've spoken about this for a while, getting you on the podcast, and you're finally here. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's good to be here.
Nice. Hey, before we actually get stuck into this, I've just got to do a little bit of housekeeping to try and get a few more people to jump on our social media platforms. So for anyone who hasn't done so, please subscribe, like, and follow to all of our social media platforms. We're available on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitch, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you haven't already done so, please check out our website, openheartedsociety.com, and please subscribe to our mailing list. Photon John, did you like that one, brother?
I did. Are you still getting used to X?
I am, man. And then, I don't know, for some reason, because I never really use Twitch much, I always stuff up saying Twitch. So I'm always like, oh, my God, what is this? So, yeah, I got that. I think that sounded pretty good. But anyway, we should get stuck into this. So if there's anyone listening out there today, please feel free to shoot through some questions while we're talking. I'm sure it'd be great to share some stuff with Rachel. Oh man, I completely forgot the name of what we're covering today, but I just see it up the top there right now. So we've got some really cool stuff. So what we're going to be covering today is the importance of evidence-based neurodiversity resources. And who better to talk about this than the master of evidence-based resources herself, Rachel Worsley. What do you reckon, Rachel?
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. Yes, feel free to start firing away questions and I will expand upon this topic, which is very close to my heart.
Nice. So, I think before we do start, there could be, there's probably listeners on here who maybe haven't met you before or know about the amazing work you're doing. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are first, maybe some of your journey, all of that type of stuff, and before we get stuck into it?
Sure. So my name's Rachel Worsley. As you probably could see from the title before, I am autistic and ADHD. I was diagnosed at the age of 25 with autism and ADHD after spending most of my life being diagnosed with depression and anxiety, or just being overly emotional or emotionally unstable, or just get over yourself kind of thing. And I suppose I got to that journey, after having a career in, I guess, several different spots. First in medical journalism, where I reported on, I suppose, clinical and political news for doctors in kind of all various sort of fields, gastroenterology, endocrinology, just all sorts of interesting disciplines. I don't have a medical background. I studied a law degree, but I'm not a practicing lawyer, unfortunately. But I guess along the journey, I was always trying to figure out why I was the way that I was, I suppose. And it kind of reached a point where I was working in a law firm and I was really struggling. And I talked to somebody who suggested I should look into ADHD and autism. And when I started looking at the research and all that, I thought, oh my God, like maybe I do. But I suppose all the resources I was looking at, I suppose, was just really badly informed and just crap, really. And I just don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, totally. We're just, I think, from what I can see, and I totally agree with you on this, it's just, I think that especially with the internet, Google, all that type of stuff, a lot of resources up there can be just people's opinions sometimes. And I'm not talking like opinions from doctors. I'm talking about, I've gone online, in the past, especially back in the early days, to look at stuff and being like, people might share some things about how to be, I don't know, how to manage ADHD, for example. And I can just tell it's just someone has just wrote something and put what their experience was. But that's like the top ranking profile. Do you know what I mean? The top ranking thing on Google there. And it's like, damn, man, people could be getting like the wrong advice or getting the wrong what's the word I'm looking for?
Subjective advice.
Yeah, or they think that's what it is type of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of what I discovered when I was in my journey, just looking into these resources. It's just full first-person experiences, which is helpful when you sort of try and understand experiences, but it wasn't really backed by strong evidence, I suppose. And what I kind of mean by evidence is just kind of studies that are done, qualitative and quantitative studies. So qualitative meaning mostly based on a group of interviews that have been collated in a systematic fashion that then draw out sort of meaningful themes for people to look into, versus quantitative data, which is mostly around collecting data and doing surveys and collating all that sort of data, that kind of thing. But that's sort of because it's just part of the scientific method, and that scientific method adds that rigor to these resources. And so I was just reading all this stuff in research papers, I suppose, and I thought, but the problem is with research, I just thought, how do you get this stuff out there for the general public to understand? And so that kind of was like, okay. And then I went to a neurodiversity conference, which is where I first met you, Will, back in 2019, the Neurodiversity Employment.
Sorry, can I butt in on that, right? I actually ran into someone from that conference. You know Vicky Little from Specialist Stern?
Yes.
I ran into her the other week, and I was like, oh my God, I remember running into you. And, because neurodiversity has changed a lot since then in regards to understanding and maybe being a bit more accepted now. And do you remember like the microphones were like, hey, like crackling and all that type of stuff? I just remember that clearly as like beautiful setting. It was like right on the water and all that type of stuff. But the audio was just, it sounded like, when you're at a club and back in the day, they don't really do it too much now. It'd be like, meal number 1, 2, 3 is ready. Meal number 1, 2, 3, or the bingo thing. You know what I mean?
Keno numbers.
Yeah, totally. It sounded like that. But sorry to cut in on you there, Rachel. That's what I remember from that,
That's interesting. That's the most memorable thing you got from that conference, I suppose.
I did take a lot of other good things, but I think it was more because it really pissed me off. You know what I mean? Because I was a speaker there, and when you're speaking and the equipment is shit, it affects your presentation. You know what I mean? So of course I'm going to remember it because I was pissed off.
Yeah.
But
I've probably experienced that a little more often than yourself, Will, having played in some dives.
But still, man, it's almost like a gig. You know what I mean? Like when you're like in a band, right? You're performing, and when you're public speaking and sharing information, it's almost the same thing. You're performing. You want to put on a good performance, and you want people to take that information away.
And you expect a certain quality of service from the venue.
Totally, man. Totally. Yeah. Sorry, let's get back to what Rachel was talking about. Just for the listeners, you are actually on a podcast with 3 ADHDers right here. So this may go off in a lot of tangents today. Am I correct?
I really feel like I'm going on several tangents and probably running through several of the questions at the same time, Will. So
it's okay. It's okay. This is what this podcast's all about. Just
cool.
Being random as hell.
But I mean, to bring it back to the point, that was my experience a little when I, I guess it was early 2000s when I started to take it seriously that I might be autistic, and was looking online, and I remember I found this one website called wrongplanet.net, but that was kind of the blind leading the blind, because it's just a whole community of people on a forum going, hey, what the hell is wrong with us? None of us can figure it out. And we're trying to share personal experiences, but I can recall that being a common problem with everyone. We were just starved for information. We're all trying to help each other out to find it.
Absolutely. And I guess that was interesting, which is why when I came to this conference, I was seeing, again, there were people presenting some really interesting information, like Shay Wissell produced some really interesting information on dyslexia, for example, from her research at the time, which I think is now published from what the research publication process takes quite a few years. So it's quite interesting to see from back then and then now, just kind of seeing a lot of that research now getting published. And I suppose I kind of ran into the same problem, like thinking, why is all this good stuff being talked about not sort of put out there for the world to understand? And so that's how I kind of ended up starting Neurodiversity Media, was to initially as a content marketing agency to help spread the word about the conference and to start getting the word out there about these research studies that I was looking into the subject, studies about ADHD productivity and project management and just all sorts of things.
You know what, sort of going back to just say what Kevin said before, and this is going to tie into what we're sort of talking about. Like Kevin was saying, he would go on these forums of other people who were just trying to find information or whatever like that. I've gone on to like Facebook groups and that for ADHD before and stuff like that. And sometimes I find that people, it's almost like real cliquey, right? You might say, so for example, I've shared information on some of those platforms where it has been evidence-based, it's been this and that. Then people will just, certain groups get together and they'll be like, oh, no, that's a load of crap. Rah, 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 rah. This person doesn't know what they're talking about. And it's like, oh my God. This is terrible, because people who may not know this research or are just looking to find help will probably go to these groups first and often believe what the information they're sharing in these group chats or forums is actually correct. Do you know what I mean? And then when you get someone come in who actually knows what they're talking about and trying to refer them to people who actually can help, often you get shut down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a real massive problem in the space. And it's kind of really sad because when you have evidence-based information that you want to share, exactly, hurt people, it's about laced just out there. It's about that, it's really, really sad. And I think for me, it's just about you have to really stand up for yourself and say, hey, this is information that can really help you. And it is based on the science. It's based on a group of researchers who know what they're talking about. There's a growing number of autistic-led researchers actually in this space trying to build on the research and trying to create, more evidence-based research that will help people. And I suppose I'm focused on kind of the workplace in particular, but this could apply to any other context as well.
So we've got Mandy Jane Lace. So we have to appreciate trauma-based responses. He's also said loving kindness and repetition.
Well, I guess my question that kind of answers the question I would have asked, which is how do you push, better research that's going to get better results for people to understand when I guess my thinking is that, a lot of people, especially people who came up without the information, particularly maybe later diagnosed people, you have this very personal journey with no good information because you can't find it, let's say. And then you come to certain conclusions that are very personal to you that may have worked for you in certain areas. They may be unproductive in other areas that you don't quite realize. But I guess you would become defensive in that sense. When presented with something, how do you push that evidence-based research to the front and have it be taken seriously?
I think it's about, I think that's where the power of journalism in the media comes through, I suppose. Yeah. It is about trying to make that information accessible through plain English and through graphics and through video and through podcasts, I suppose, through different formats and trying to push that to the front. And I guess I do a lot of SEO as well to kind of push that content to the top of the webpage and ensure that it is the first few things that people read. I think one example is the legal kind of, there's a legal guide, a visual guide to ADHD work that's kind of top when you Google, your rights at work if you have ADHD. It's the top result. And that's what I truly aim for is how do you get that up there for people to access? It is about, using SEO. It is about definitely, creating ways to make that information accessible in different formats wherever possible.
Can I say on that, right? It was really interesting. So Kevin and I were actually looking when we were getting some blogs together to, I suppose, draw people to the podcast and all of that type of stuff. We were actually looking at a lot of keywords and all of that type of stuff. And it was actually interesting because a lot of the keywords that we wanted to use that were more related to neurodiversity just weren't getting searched. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, instead of saying neurodivergent, for example, we would have to use neurodiverse more, which technically isn't correct within that area type of thing because it just would get searched more, if that makes sense, which we found. And it was oh, my God. So to get more people interested, we have to sort of do the opposite of what we're trying to do. If that it's just stupid how it sort of works.
Which I think spoke to that lack of education, you know what I mean? That people weren't searching the right terms necessarily. So I'll be interested to watch that. So I do SEO as well for a living, Rachel, but how those keywords change over time as the conversation changes,
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. You know what, Rachel? So, we've got a few listeners here and, maybe there's people who don't quite understand, they might be thinking, well, what's the point of evidence-based resources? But what is an evidence-based research? And you sort of said it a little bit before, but can you just explain it a little bit for maybe people who don't know what it is and maybe, why that's important?
Sure. Yeah. the way I consider an evidence-based resource is simply based on the practice of scientific research, I suppose. So if you just go to Google Scholar and you pull up the research papers, you'll see a bunch of titles and all of that, and you go and look into it. And basically, a scientific paper is based on an abstract. It's got introduction, conclusion, there's data, there's methods. It's gone through a peer review process, which is basically a bunch of people who are recruited to sort of do a review of the content before it goes out into the world. And so because of that really rigorous process, it's kind of based on the scientific evidence, I suppose. So that's what I call, I guess, an evidence-based resource. I guess that's a very short explanation of what evidence-based resource is.
Yeah, no. But more than anything, why are evidence-based resources important? And I think this is the big part as well, because, I could get up and what, like I said, what we're seeing is, and we're going to talk a little bit about AI and that a little bit later, but, why is evidence-based resource important? I know why it's important, but, maybe why is that important to, say, the people listening, for example?
Yeah, well, I think evidence-based resources are important because it is about educating yourself on the latest science that is available in this area. It is about, knowing that the research, I guess, that the research that you're doing in this space and looking into this space is based on the strongest possible scientific method being applied to it. And I suppose, you don't want to rely on just hearsay or just a bunch of people just talking and sharing firsthand experiences. That's part of, that's still important, but it's not as important, I think, as just having resources that I think that are just based on the strongest possible evidence.
I think there's that saying, you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Everyone presents differently, so taking subjective advice from someone on social media is not always the best way to go. It can be helpful, and it's good that it starts a conversation, but I think evidence-based removes the subjectivity and gives you the bare facts, I think, on way things.
But you know what, right? A lot of the, say, stuff that I might read, let's say, I don't know, a corporate company releases something, I don't know, something to say that they're interested, why neurodiversity is so important in the workplace. When I read those, they're just the same stuff, which you can tell people have just gone to Google and found the first thing they've found and then wrote a report based off, or wrote a blog based off that there.
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point there, because I think there's a lot of stuff in the neurodiversity space where it's just kind of spouted, but there's no real sort of evidence behind it. Like, I've read the paper where the so-called autism advantage doesn't actually really exist to a limited extent. And that's really interesting, because there's a lot of talk around certain companies who are promoting the autism advantage, but yet there's research that suggests that actually it's, that's limited in some respect, and it's probably being overblown, I suppose. And so that's really interesting when you hear that, because, I guess also I had a point and it ran away somewhere. But
I think
us. But,
that's ADHD right there, right? And it will come back to you shortly. You'll be like, hang on, I've just remembered it. Can I share this? You know what I mean?
But I think, I know personally any potential advantage I may have as a result of different thinking, it comes with costs. I think pushing too hard towards this whole advantage idea can be a little distressing to those of us who I don't want to say who experience challenges. Yeah.
Sorry. She just remembered.
Yeah. Go.
Yes, remember my point. So there's also a lot of talk around autism training, for example. So. Like we're thinking about how do we best help autistic people or just anyone who's neurodivergent really perform best in the workplace, and there's lots of programs being undertaken at the moment to analyze that, but there's not actually much evaluation of these programs. So studies that actually look into whether these programs are actually effective. And when there are studies that are actually done into it, most of them kind of say that they don't work very well, or like autism training doesn't actually do anything to remove those biases. And that's why I guess it goes to the question of why evidence-based resources are important, because these studies kind of show that actually there is so much more work that needs to be done to actually improve the quality of autism training or the quality of programs out there so that it can be a useful resource for everyone else out there. But so I just thought I wanted to add that point.
No, that's a good point. You know what, right? Like we didn't actually, I think it's just important. I don't think you did share a little bit, but it'd be actually interesting to, and we usually go through this at the beginning, but maybe talk a little bit more about your work. You know, you've built this website that, you know, corporates can actually connect with, you know. Can you delve a little bit more into that there for us? Because we're talking about all these great resources and that, and this is where people can connect with that, do you know? And we'll probably sell it a little bit more at the end of the podcast, but I think it's just important for our listeners to hear why what you're doing is important and why people need to connect with that type of information.
Sure. So neurodiversitymedia.com is a website at the moment that holds a resource library that is full of these resources, which I mentioned is mostly based on the latest evidence. So the studies that I look into, so all the stuff that you might find on Google Scholar and all that, all those studies, I help to summarize and report on those studies for people to read in plain English so that people can understand what's the latest research and what's the most helpful way to help people. You know, for example, you know, I have a resource that was quite popular on LinkedIn, which was about, you know, what's the best interview questions? How do you adapt interview questions for job seekers? And it actually came up with the best sort of top 10 questions that have been changed specifically to help autistic job seekers, for example. So it's not just reporting on fluffy kind of content and all that. This is real practical stuff that can help actual job seekers and people at work, you know, strategies that researchers have actually done research and found to be effective when implemented. So that's the sort of work that I do in this space, is to actually help simplify and make accessible, really useful information from the research that can help people, just present it in a way that people can understand. And my main medium for it is through the NeuroWork newsletter, which is an email newsletter that goes out weekly every Tuesday morning, Australian time. And it kind of curates the latest information from the resource library. And I've also curated other evidence-based resources that I've found on the journey, because it's not all about my resources. I find there's also some really useful ones, but I'm very selective about what I pick. You know, I don't just share random blogs and all that. I just pick what's actually evidence-based or a useful first-hand perspective and share that as well. So that's a summary of what I do.
No, that's cool, because I think it's good that you're very strict, because I think you know, you need to be strict with these types of things, because, you know, like and I think I can't remember the name of the lady who was on before. Who did we post up before? She Mandy. Sorry, what did she have before? Something about I can't even remember, but it can be bad if people are getting that wrong information, if that makes sense. So being strict with it almost makes people sort of work harder if they want that type of stuff released, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a gatekeeper kind of role that I have. Like, I guess that's what supposedly the good media or good journalism does, is to kind of be a bit of a gatekeeper in terms of selecting the right information to publish to the public. But because the internet is already doing a good job publishing everyone else's first-hand opinions, you know, ill-informed opinions and all that jazz. So for me, it's actually curating a space where actually it's protected, there's evidence-based, it's, you know, useful, it's practical, it's accessible for people. And that's a really important part of what I do.
It's not fake news.
It's not fake news.
Well, but this is well, the thing is, like, I'm, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guaranteed that some of these news outlets around the world, they're getting paid by a certain someone. So they're paid to write articles that are really directing people to certain things, if that makes sense. But I'm assuming that you don't live by that sort of rule, because it's about getting the right information out, not getting information out because people have paid you a lot of money to do that, if that makes sense. I'm sure. But anyone listening who does have a load of money to give to Rachel to help get these resources out, I'm sure you wouldn't complain. Am I right, Rachel?
No, definitely not.
It
is time consuming, but it's important work, I suppose. And, I get regular donations through a tip jar that I have on my website. And so, I had $50 donated the other week, and I was really grateful for that. There is no evidence base.
Here, what I'll do, I'll read it out, and then so we've got a LinkedIn user. I'm not sure who, and it says, "I'm curious as to whether there is evidence-based research on language, etc., neurodiverse versus neurodivergent. I recently heard from an academic institution that both terms are accepted, evidence-based."
That's really interesting. Yeah, I have.
Good question, LinkedIn user.
Thank you for that question, because I think that's interesting. I have to follow up on see if there's any that academic institution, I suppose, because that universities can put up press releases and that kind of thing about stuff, but it doesn't mean it's actually published in a journal, for example. So I'm curious to know what the exact context of it. But I guess, neurodiverse versus neurodivergent. I mean, I think that's a very tricky sort of discussion to have, because lots of people do say neurodiverse when grammatically it should be neurodivergent. I know there's research. It's not.
Okay. All right.
I did look into this a little while ago, but again, it was the internet, so I'm not saying that it's true or not. But from what I could see, and trying to judge the reliability of what I was looking at, neurodiverse tended to apply to a pluralistic group, whereas neurodivergent was an individual. But I don't know, personally, I've always seen neurodiversity as all of us. Like it's diversity, whereas neurodivergent is the individual who is.
Do you know what, right?
Off the neurotypical path.
You know what, right? Like sometimes I get to the point where I'm just like, just call it whatever you want, man. I just want I've got bigger things to worry about, man.
Yeah,
because I just hear so many conversations about this, and I'm just at the point where I'm just like, look, man, if you call me this, cool, whatever. I've just got things I'm working towards to build. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's a whole.
The community has bigger problems.
But to tell you the truth, that was a good question, Nat. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. But you know what? We've sort of spoken a little bit about this, but what are the issues with non-evidence-based research? What's going on?
Well, I think firstly, non-evidence-based resources can be influenced by bias, I suppose. So people have one very subjective opinion about something that could work for them or doesn't work for them, but it's not actually able to be replicated. It doesn't stand a test of validity, or it's not reliable because it's very narrow-minded, I suppose. And so if you only have that narrow-minded sort of view to rely upon, it kind of excludes all the other information and things that could actually be helpful to understanding how to approach a workplace issue, for example. I think another issue with non-evidence-based resources is that it's basically informed by, I just think it goes back to just being informed by a single opinion without being backed up by multiple opinions, I suppose, that are kind of consistent. So in a qualitative study, you kind of be able to group all these opinions together and be able to theme it and code it in a way that makes sense. And there's themes that come out of that research, while the single opinion is just one out of many different opinions, and it doesn't hold that much weight unless you can compare it with others. So I think, it comes back down to just the rigor, I suppose, of opinions and how they can stand up against the scientific method. So some of the issues, I suppose, with non-evidence-based resources.
And I think, like we said before, people, I'm seeing people, like you were talking about before, people like, oh yeah, we're going to do some neurodiversity training or for the workplace. And I'm seeing a lot of people out that, that's starting to become a big thing now. And I'm seeing people who may work in the neurodiversity space, but not on, say, a doctor level, or have the research behind them, and then they're going out and teaching this information to corporates who often take in that information, and that information actually isn't correct, if that makes sense. And I'm assuming that a lot of the information they get, once again, is probably from the internet. It is not evidence-based. I've been at like breakfasts before when someone has gotten up to talk about neurodiversity, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to me. But they're sort of talking about it like that's how all neurodivergent people are, type of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is actually frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it would be possible to update your view too, given the scientific method and information changing over time, in case, because I know there's, I've seen not official information, I'm not saying studies, but, the even medically professionally understood way to, explain to someone who has autism how they work has been quite wrong in the past at times, So it took me a couple of goes to get diagnosed, and a lot of that was to do with the amount of time that passed between them and how much better things were understood. Am I on the right track there?
But do you know what, right? Like when I was speaking at that conference on Friday, I had the Rain Man question. You know what I mean? I had questions, and someone's like, "Oh, so like the movie, Rain Man is that true? Like people have these extremely high strengths type of thing?" And I was technically we do have these very high strengths, but I really had to get across the fact that that's not autism. And don't get me wrong, to tell you the truth, I actually really enjoyed the Rain Man movie. I thought it was like a very interesting movie, but not from the perspective of a autistic person. But
it's not like he was basing it completely on nothing. I've known autistic people who are low functioning, and
totally. And I actually did say that.
But that's the stereotype that everyone had that he was basing it off. It's
that was what
far from indicative of the spectrum.
Well, that's what I said. I said, man, like mate, there's probably some people out there like that. But I said, man, I've got friends who are doctors, who are lawyers. I even mentioned you, Kev, lead singers in bands. And I said, you just wouldn't even know. I said, but yeah, we do have very high strengths there, maybe similar to Rain Man type of thing. But when you couldn't base autism off Rain Man there, so I had to really sort of steer it away from that type of thing. But I'm assuming because we see that type of stuff, is misinformation a problem in this field?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's definitely lots of harmful myths that are circulated, especially around in Instagram and all that. I mean, Instagram is also a good source of information in some ways as well, but not necessarily evidence-based information. Again, it's all first-person perspectives, and there's just not enough people just objectively reporting on the facts and what the myths of autism, for example. I use autism as but it can apply to neurodivergent information. There's just I just find there's just lots of really bad information out there.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point in regards to we're seeing so many influencers on social media now, and it could be a young kid, it could be a teenager, it could be someone who has a huge following, but then they do something around ADHD or share something, and then they become this big person in this field, and it's sort of like they're almost like really not. Then it feels like they're contributing, like bringing attention to it, but the information is wrong once again. Mm-hmm. And like, this is what I mean. Like, what did I see the other day? Someone was on Instagram and did something, and I was like, man, that's not ADHD. But then I look at like the 13,000 comments of like, oh yeah, man, this and that, and I'm just like, oh my God. And then this person's giving advice on stuff, and I'm just like, oh my God, man.
I like to call it mob enablement. And it happens outside of neurodiversity, but someone posts something and they're like, do you have a vibe with this situation? And then a million other people go, oh yeah, I do too. And then all of a sudden they think they're part of a group and that this information is correct because so many other people feel it. And I think that can happen a little in the neurodiversity community as well. Where they need to remember that, if this person isn't a doctor or a researcher or an expert in the field, then maybe connect with them and talk with them, have a broader talk with them about connecting over neurodiversity, but understand that that's their subjective opinion. And maybe you have a similarity in that term, in that part of your personality that may or may not have something to do with neurodiversity. I don't think that making decisions on what constitutes being neurodivergent should come from social media influencers.
But the thing is, with a lot of these influencers, sometimes they get big on social media through, I don't know, maybe they're good looking, or maybe they've done something, they've been on the news for something, and then they've adapted this other thing into it, and that's why they've gotten so big. And it's not really, it's just not backed by evidence. You can just tell, and it's just like, man, it's good to, I think it's good that they're bringing awareness, but then sometimes when I see them giving advice on things, I'm just like, yeah, but that's your opinion. That's not based on evidence type of thing, if that makes sense.
It's a good thing that we're listening to neurodivergent people as a society now, and we're trying to hear what they have to say to us. That doesn't mean that we should just ask any old neurodivergent person on what constitutes good information on the topic necessarily.
Totally.
Yeah.
Nice. Let's get a bit into this technical stuff. What do you think of AI, Rachel?
Oh, well, I guess it's an interesting thing. Well, the problem is it's with ChatGPT, right? It's kind of based on whatever information you feed into it, I suppose. And if the existing information out there is full of misinformation and stuff, then that's also what ChatGPT will spit out as well as the answers. And sometimes, I've asked ChatGPT to tell me of recent studies and stuff like that, and it's spitting out answers where the studies don't even exist when I've actually done a fact check. And I'm like, really, ChatGPT? I mean, come on,
And what does it reply to that? Does it go, well, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, this is a study, and I'm like, you're full of shit.
No, look. I think with AIs, I do like some of the things it can do in regards to support and all that. But yeah, because honestly, I went to this conference on the weekend, and there was what was it? Certain things talking about AI, especially in education and all that. Do you know what, right? Like, we could actually be running the podcast how we are now, and actually hook up like some AI robot or whatever like that, and it could like be having us speaking in a different language and everything.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. So like, say if you're having a meeting with someone overseas and you speak completely different languages, you can actually communicate with each other. Or say if you're teaching students who speak a different language, it can convert that into their language. It's still not 100%, but it's getting there. Do you know what I mean? But what I might do, I might read out this question and then we can maybe answer it a bit more. So do you think AI has the potential to cause issues with sourcing good information?
Yes, it can. Is the short answer. The longer answer.
Yeah, can we get a bit of a longer one? Because we still have 15 minutes. Eh?
It's okay. Well, I think the potential to cause issues with sourcing good information, I suppose, comes back, I think, as I touched on, basically like the input that it gets when the machine was built in the first place. So if it's being fed information that isn't really good in the first place, then whatever it's going to come with sourcing that good information is going to be bad. So, but then on the flip side, if it's being fed with good information and studies and it actually, crawls Google Scholar rather than just a bunch of, random first-person blogs on the internet, then actually it will come up with really good information. So I think, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think it can be more efficient to collate information and present it in a summarized format, which is really useful for me if I'm short on time and I really want to do it. But then I just have to spend time to then fact check and make sure that it hasn't invented.
Which sort of defeats the purpose of why you're searching it, right?
Exactly what I was going to say,
Yeah. But in saying that, right, it's going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, it will get better. I mean, it's going to get better. The information is getting better. And there's definitely, I'm sure, AI technology that's looking into the research space right now and trying to make things more efficient for researchers. So I think it is going to get better. I think it's just got a few teething problems. And I think it just comes down to, making sure when you're training AI models, it is about making sure that it is being fed the right sort of information in the first place. So the people who are running these AI models have to be scientists, and they have to be people who appreciate good science and able to feed these models the right sort of information in the first place. Otherwise, it just completely defeats the purpose of being able to source good information if we don't have the right people in place to teach the AI models to do the right thing.
It's kind of an extension of what we've already discussed with ourselves, don't feed it influencers.
I
think that's a pretty good rule of thumb for anything to do with medical advice, I would say.
But like I said, at the end of the day, I think an influencer is good at bringing attention to what the problem is, but giving advice on the problem really needs to go to a medical type of background, if that makes sense. Just to have that evidence base behind it type of thing. Because I think it was, here we go. Mandy said before, evidence-based practices shows people what works. Would you agree with that, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what good evidence-based practice does is it collates the latest research or the latest methods and the latest, methodology, I think is the word I was trying to reach for, to come up with results that actually, have a tangible impact on the way that we do things. That's the purpose of good research in the first place.
Yeah, totally.
Tiny bit off track, but I was just curious, is there anything you've seen lately through your work in terms of latest research that excited you?
Well, I think what was interesting was, I guess, the example that I mentioned before, I think, was just the adaptation of interview questions. For me, that was really interesting, really exciting, is because there's been a lot of chat just generally around, interview questions are bad for autistic people and all that, but we kind of have to accept that job interviews still remain part and parcel of the journey towards being recruited at an organization. So how do we actually make the job interview process better for autistic people? Well, it seems like the researchers have actually gone out and done research around, these questions can be adapted in a different way to ensure that autistic people can sort of speak to the details, instead of, tell me a bit about yourself. Well, that's really general. It's like, well, tell us a bit about your work and your work experience and the projects you have done. That's like so much more specific for an autistic.
So can I ask?
Are you telling us the first question we always ask is a bad one?
Oh, yeah. That's a good. But to tell you the truth, well, to tell you the truth, right? To tell you the truth, when it's a podcast, we want people to talk, and we want if that first question is very broad and people are going to give us a broad answer, that's actually good. Because we want people to be broad and open with that. That's, I suppose, why we're called the OpenHearted Podcast, right?
Well, absolutely. But that's why I want to emphasize that was in the context of a job interview. So tell me about yourself will be fine in a podcast, but I think in the context of a job interview where tell me about yourself might be just so broad and confusing for some, not all autistic people. I always say many autistic people may struggle with where to start. So just being told specific parts can help. That's my 2 cents on that.
No, exactly. I remember being terrified whenever that question came up, and it was always the first question. And it's like, well, what about myself? I'm thinking, it's a job interview, so I know they're after something, but they're giving me no information to go on.
Out of curiosity, what were the questions that you speak about or is this something you don't want to share?
I just got it up right now. So it's saying, for example, tell me a little bit about yourself is the general one. So the adapted question is, first, I'm going to ask you to give a short introduction to yourself. What are your best personal characteristics? What are your educational qualifications and what work experience do you have? So it's kind of breaking it down into 3 different questions, but really specific, I suppose. That's the thing.
And that could actually be used for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. I think
I think that sounds like a way better question than, hey, tell me a bit about yourself. You know what I mean?
I
used to, when I ran teams and stuff before I realized that I was not well suited for that, but I was good at running them, procedurally. A lot of, just weird neurodiverse people would just go off on these long, fun rants about how they like the beach. And this is not pertinent to the situation at all. Well, that's a much better question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and the rest of the questions are just pretty much like, for example, do you work well as part of a team? The adapted question is, I'm going to ask you to give me an example of a time you worked in a team. What was your role in the team and how did you work with other team members to solve problems? So it's kind of just simply breaking down the question into more specific parts and getting people to give examples, which I agree helps everyone, I suppose. It's just not, how do you call it? Like just broad. It's just easy to understand for everyone. If everyone can benefit from it, I suppose.
Is that, how would you pronounce that?
Valves BT-dub.
Hey, what's up? Sorry, who is this, by the way? Sorry, for all
this is on Twitch. This is on Twitch, my friends.
Yeah. I don't know who that is, actually, but hey, what's up? Thanks very much for reaching out, by the way. So at least that's cool that someone's listening to us on Twitch. So it does work. That seems good. Because we were sort of at one point like, man, do we keep this or what? You watch, I bet you it will come up shortly and someone will say, hey, it's such and such. But we'll see what's going on. We're almost towards the end there anyway, but just sort of talking a little bit about AI before, do you think AI has the potential to help with sourcing good information? Did we sort of talk about that before?
Yeah,
I did sort of talk about that flip side. I think I did say that it can help with summarizing information that's really, hard to understand. So you can kind of, some good AI tools out there that can look at a research paper and sort of, try and give you a basic summary. It's not perfect, but it's out there. And so that could be the useful stuff about how you source good information is just kind of summarizing that good information out there and making it easily digestible, all that. So there is potential. At least that's one way that I can think of that AI has potential to help with sourcing good information.
Now that you're sort of in corporate education now, am I correct?
Well, yes, I guess my day job is as a learning designer.
And it's for a lot of corporate sort of type of
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yes.
How have you sort of looked into much, I suppose, evidence-based information around that sector at all? Like maybe how learners can learn better, or how it should be designed, or anything like that. It's just interesting because I'm obviously big into education. It's interesting to know these things.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I haven't gone as much into that journey yet. I just there's a neurodiversity module that I recently designed. I suppose that was based on the latest evidence-based information. But I don't know. I'm still at the beginning of my journey, so I'm not sure if I can answer.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting because, especially when I did this talk on Friday, I wanted it to be kick-ass, you know what I mean? Because you want to, when you get an opportunity to speak in front of people who know nothing about neurodiversity, you really want to open their minds and all that. And trying to find information, especially around neurodiversity and adult education, it was limited. A lot of the stuff I had to go to was more broad in regards to adult education for disability. Do you know what I mean? Really not specifically neurodiversity. So if you find any, please hit me up, yeah?
I will, definitely.
I'd love to check that out, It's just, it probably doesn't even really exist yet.
Probably not. I mean, it's interesting because I have to stress that my work and what I do at the moment is mostly based in the workplace. I suppose the education sector is something that I've sort of been exploring a little bit on the side, but not so much. Yeah, the education sector has been mostly on the workplace.
And I'm assuming a lot of it can be because to tell you the truth, there is actually a lot of not as much as, say, kids, but there's becoming a lot of information around neurodiversity in the workplace now. So there's probably a lot more in that side of things, which you could probably take a lot from. And I got to admit, with the presentation I did on Friday, I did take a little bit of that, but I could relate it back to education in a way. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, that's good.
I think so for example, let's take ADHD, for example. People in the workplace struggle to concentrate. It can be hard to understand what your maybe certain things that you've been given. You may need certain tools or support. Those tools and support can actually help you in education as well. Do you know what I mean? It sort of goes hand in hand, but I don't have the evidence there backing it. There's nothing really there yet, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like you just got to, I don't know, just go off what I've already found and move from there, if that makes sense. Photon John, did you have anything else you wanted to say, my friend?
Just if you do, Rachel, find anything definitive out about the terminology, I'd like to know.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look it up.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to point out, I bloody loved that we had that ADHD moment where Rachel sort of lost the point and came back to it, and we all knew what was going on and accommodated for it. This is why I love this podcast.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, how many times do you have mind blanks, and then you're like, it will come back, and you'll be like, hang on, and like in my mind, it's like, oh, hang on, man, I really got to get it out before I forget.
Before I
forget. That's why I was like, man, quick, shut up, Kev.
Yeah.
We've got it before Rachel forgets it again. But all good. Rachel,
and I am now subscribed, by the way.
Weren't you on her? Well, in saying that, if people want to connect with you, Rachel, what's the best thing to do? Where to go? Where can they find you? What's going on?
Yep, so I'm neurodiversitymedia.com, so hopefully everyone can spell that, neurodiversitymedia.com, and there you can subscribe to the NeuroWork newsletter on the webpage there. So that's the best way to stay in touch with weekly resources about neurodiversity in the workplace. As for myself, I can be found on LinkedIn at Rachel Worsley. You can also find Neurodiversity Media on X. I'm not used to calling it X. X and Facebook and LinkedIn as Neurodiversity Media. So that's the best way to connect.
Awesome. Hey, are you getting a lot of people subscribing to your newsletter, by the way?
I haven't checked yes, in general, yes. I've had people subscribe quite regularly over the,
That's good. Well, you're getting it out every Tuesday, is that correct?
Yeah, every Tuesday. So yeah, I've got to prepare one for tomorrow.
Oh, wow. That's heaps cool. Well, congratulations on all that. But Rachel, look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Kev, was there anything else you wanted to finish off with before we close up?
I'm good. Great chat. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel, thanks heaps. You're looking well. And, for all of our listeners, if you haven't already done so, please check out Rachel's work. She's doing amazing stuff. It's all evidence-based. It's, literally, it's not bullshit, is it? Okay. It's definitely real. So, Rachel, thank you so much. Keep up the good work. And for any of our listeners out there, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to Rachel's website there. Or if you want to subscribe to ours at the OpenHeartedSociety.com. Or please follow, subscribe, and like to all of our social media platforms. My name's Will Wheeler with my co-host Photon John. Thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on the podcast today. This is the Open Hearted Podcast. Until next time.